Something just cracked open in Tehran, and the world hasn't fully understood what it means yet. In the past few hours, a story has begun to leak out of the back channels of the Middle East that, if you read it slowly, sounds almost impossible. Iran, the same Iran that has spent 2 decades telling the West to go to hell over its centrifuges. The same Iran that has been called the most dangerous nuclear threshold state on the planet. That Iran just blinked, not on television, not on a podium, not with a flag-draped speech in Tehran. It blinked in a quiet room through 2 regional officials in a message passed to the AP. And the message was simple enough to read in a single breath and heavy enough to rearrange the map. Iran is offering to dilute part of its highly enriched uranium and ship the rest of it out of the country. Read that sentence again. Because 3 months ago, the idea that Iranian uranium would leave Iranian soil was treated as fantasy, a red line, a regime-ending humiliation, something the supreme leader would die before signing. And tonight, somewhere between Doha and Muscat, that exact offer is sitting on a table with a 30-day timer ticking on top of it. And there is one more detail buried in there, a detail that almost slips past you on the first read. Vladimir Putin has already offered to take the uranium, to hold it in Russia. So pause for a second and feel the weight of what is being floated here. The most dangerous material on Earth, produced by America's most stubborn adversary, possibly being handed to America's most aggressive rival, to end a war that has already pulled in Israel, the Gulf, Washington, and the global oil market. That is not a diplomatic story. That is a tectonic story. That is the kind of move that gets written into history books decades from now, as the night the balance of power shifted and most people scrolled right past it. So tonight we are going to walk through what just happened, who is really behind it, what they want, what they are terrified of, and why this single offer, if it goes wrong, could light the entire region on fire. Because the part nobody is saying out loud is this: Iran did not make this offer from a position of strength. Iran made this offer because something inside the regime is bleeding. And when a regime like this one starts bleeding, everyone around it should be paying very close attention. Here is what we know, and here is what changes everything. According to the AP, on Monday, Iran's negotiators put forward a proposal to end the war that has been grinding through the region. The offer has 2 halves. Iran will take part of its highly enriched uranium, the stockpile that has terrified Western capitals for years, and dilute it. The rest of it, the most dangerous portion, will be physically removed from Iran and transferred to a third country. Iran wants 30 days to lock in the details. 2 regional officials, both directly involved in the negotiations, confirmed it. That is not gossip. That is not a leak from a think tank. That is 2 people in the room saying, yes, this is real, this is on the table, and the clock has already started. And then the second shoe drops. Russia is already in the picture. Vladimir Putin previously offered to receive and store the Iranian uranium on Russian soil, which means before this proposal was ever public, a corridor was being built, a handoff was being designed. Moscow had positioned itself as the warehouse for the most politically radioactive material on the planet. Now think about who is at this table. You have Tehran, a theocracy that has spent 40 years framing its nuclear program as a matter of national dignity. You have Washington, a political establishment that has burned through 4 presidents trying to figure out how to defang Iran without sending in the Marines. You have Israel, which has openly bombed Iranian assets and lost soldiers, pilots, and citizens in this conflict. You have the Gulf states, who would rather not wake up to a mushroom cloud over their oil terminals. And you have Russia, which, despite being bogged down in Ukraine, has just inserted itself as the indispensable broker. This is a power struggle wearing the costume of a diplomatic offer. Make no mistake, every player here is calculating. Iran is calculating that handing over the uranium buys breathing room, pressure relief, maybe sanctions relief, maybe a freeze on the next round of Israeli strikes, maybe a path back into the global economy before the regime cracks under its own people. Russia is calculating that becoming the custodian of Iranian uranium makes it untouchable. Sanction the country that is holding the world's most dangerous warhead material? Good luck. Putin just bought himself leverage over Washington, Brussels, and Jerusalem in one move. Israel is calculating whether this is real or whether this is a stall, because every day Iran negotiates is another day Iranian engineers can hide what they already built. And Washington is calculating something more dangerous than any of them. whether to believe it. Because if the United States bets wrong in either direction, the cost is measured in cities. To understand how a moment this strange even becomes possible, you have to wind the clock back. Not weeks, years. Iran's nuclear program is older than most of the people watching this. It was the Shah, an American ally who first dreamed of Iranian reactors back in the 1970s, with quiet blessings from Washington. After the 1979 revolution, that dream did not die. It went underground, it mutated, it became the regime's insurance policy against the world. By the 2000s, the West discovered the centrifuges at Natanz, then the deep, mountain-buried facility at Fordo. Every time inspectors thought they had a handle on the program, Iran moved another piece. Every time sanctions tightened, Iran enriched a little higher, from 3.67% to 20% to 60%, and eventually into territory that, in plain language, is a short sprint from weapons grade. In 2015, the world thought it had solved this. The Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA, was supposed to lock the program down for 15 years. Then in 2018, Washington walked away from it. Iran responded by stepping on the gas. Centrifuges spun faster. The IAEA's access was cut. The stockpile grew. And while all of that was happening, the shadow war was getting louder. Israeli intelligence operations inside Iran, the killing of nuclear scientists, the Stuxnet cyber attack, the fires at Natanz that Tehran could never quite explain, tit-for-tat strikes between Iranian proxies and Israeli forces across Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen, Hezbollah on the northern border, the Houthis in the Red Sea. Every theater was hot, every theater was connected back to one country. Then came the open war, direct strikes, Iranian missiles flying toward Israeli cities, Israeli jets hitting Iranian air defenses, civilians dying on both sides. The kind of escalation analysts had been warning about for 20 years suddenly playing out on live television. And in the middle of all of it, the uranium stockpile kept growing. Every report from the IAEA got more alarming. Officials in Western capitals stopped using the word threshold and started using the word weeks, as in weeks away from a bomb. The warnings were everywhere. From the Pentagon, from European intelligence services, from former Israeli prime ministers giving speeches that sounded like funeral readings for the old world order. Iran is close. Iran is closer than you think. Iran already has what it needs. It just hasn't pulled the final trigger. And every diplomatic effort, every back channel, every Omani-brokered whisper kept hitting the same wall. Iran would not, under any circumstances, agree to lose physical control of its enriched uranium. That was the line, that was the dignity, that was the deterrent. Until tonight. Tonight, that wall just moved, which means somewhere inside that regime, something snapped. The question is what? The proposal landed quietly. No press conference, no flag-draped table, no theatrical handshake under chandeliers, just a message carried by intermediaries delivered into the ears of two regional officials who picked up the phone and told the Associated Press Iran would dilute part of its highly enriched uranium and it would transfer the remainder to a third country. 30 days to finalize. Read that line out loud, because if you say it slowly, you start to hear the cracks. Dilute part, transfer the rest to a third country, 30 days. Each phrase is a small surrender dressed in diplomatic clothing. Dilute part. That means the uranium that Iran spent years pushing toward weapons-grade territory gets walked back, down to a level where it is, in technical terms, useless for a bomb. The work, the engineering, the centrifuge cascades, the sanctions absorbed to do it, all of it neutralized in a chemistry process that takes weeks. Transfer the rest. That means physical loss of control. The barrels of enriched material that Iran has guarded behind missile defenses, mountain rock, and revolutionary guards, loaded into trucks, driven to a port or an airstrip, and put into the hands of foreigners. Foreigners with their own agendas. Foreigners who could, in theory, hand it back, hand it on, or hand it over to a third country, not Iran, not the West, somewhere in between. And the leading candidate, the one already pre-positioned, is Russia. Which is why Putin's earlier offer to take possession of the uranium is not a footnote in this story. It is the load-bearing wall, 30 days, a timer, a pressure valve, a way for Iran to say to its own hardliners, This is not surrender, this is a managed process. 30 days of cover, 30 days of negotiation, 30 days for the regime to sell this internally without losing the streets, but strip away the language, and what is actually happening here is enormous. For the first time in a generation, Iran is offering to let its most dangerous material leave its soil, not under inspection, not under monitoring, not under freezing, under transfer, under custody, under the watch of a foreign capital. This is the kind of move regimes only make when the alternative is worse, when the bombs are about to fall harder, when the economy is about to collapse faster, when the streets are about to turn on the leadership, when the calculation in the room becomes, we either give up the material or we lose the regime. And the climax of this story, the part future historians will circle, is that the offer came not from the United States, not from Israel, not from Europe, but from Iran itself, the party that 6 months ago was the most defiant voice in the room. That is the turning point. That is the moment the war changed, not on a battlefield, in a sentence. 2 officials, 1 proposal, 30 days, and a stockpile that has haunted 4 American presidencies suddenly has a return address. Within hours of the offer surfacing, the temperature in every capital that matters started to spike. In Jerusalem, the reaction was instant and cold. Israeli officials have spent the war arguing that anything less than total dismantlement is a trick. Their fear is not the uranium that gets shipped out. Their fear is the uranium that does not. The hidden barrels, the undeclared facilities, the centrifuges spinning in caves nobody mapped. Every Israeli prime minister back to begin has said the same thing in private. You cannot trust the Iranian nuclear program until it is rubble. And tonight, somewhere in Tel Aviv, generals are staring at maps and asking each other whether this proposal is a window for peace or a window for Iran to hide what it already built. In Washington, the mood is more complicated. The White House cannot publicly reject an Iranian offer to ship uranium abroad. That would be politically suicidal. Voters do not want another Middle East war. Markets do not want another Middle East war. The military does not want another Middle East war. But the same officials know that if they accept the deal and Iran cheats, the political fallout will be catastrophic. So the response is going to be slow, careful, hedged, and full of conditions. Trust but verify, written in red ink. In the Gulf, the reaction is relief, quiet relief. Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, all of them have spent this war pricing in worst-case scenarios, closed shipping lanes, hit oil platforms, a regional missile exchange that could vaporize their entire economic future in a weekend. An Iranian offer to denuclearize, even partially, is the first piece of good news these capitals have received in months. Expect them to push Washington hard to take the deal seriously. In Moscow, the smile is wide and very visible. Putin just elevated himself from spoiler to broker, from pariah to gatekeeper. The same Russian president who has been frozen out of Western diplomacy over Ukraine just inserted himself at the center of the most important non-proliferation moment of the decade. If this deal moves forward, Russia becomes indispensable, and indispensable countries do not get sanctioned. The markets felt it almost immediately. Oil, defense stocks, safe haven assets, currency pairs across the Gulf. Every trader at a Bloomberg terminal in Singapore, London, and New York had to reprice the war in real time, because if the war ends, oil drops. If the war ends, defense spending plateaus. If the war ends, 1,000 assumptions about 2026 start unraveling. Media outlets scrambled. Some called it a breakthrough. Some called it a trap. Some pointed out, correctly, that the last time Iran offered something like this, in 2015, the West signed up, and then the next administration tore the paper in half. Why would Tehran do this twice? Why would anyone trust a deal that already died once? And then there is the global response. China, watching every move, calculating whether a Russia-brokered deal helps or hurts its own influence in the Gulf. Europe exhausted, hoping, terrified of being sidelined again. The IAEA, which has been begging for access for years, suddenly being asked whether it can verify a transfer of enriched uranium to Russian soil. India and Pakistan, both nuclear powers, watching for any precedent that affects their own arsenals. The uncertainty in the air is thick. Nobody knows if this is real. Nobody knows if it holds. Nobody knows what 30 days from now looks like. And in that fog, every decision feels heavier than it should. Step back from the headlines and look at the chessboard, because if this offer holds, Even partially, the pieces just moved. Iran loses something physical. It gives up uranium. That is real. That is measurable. The regime's most prized strategic asset gets diminished. The talking point about being weeks from a bomb gets harder to maintain. The deterrent value of ambiguity, which Iran has milked for 2 decades, gets thinner. But Iran gains something larger. It buys time. It buys a possible economic reopening. It buys a pause in Israeli strikes. It buys legitimacy as a country that, in the end, chose negotiation. And most importantly, the regime gains internal cover. Hardliners get to say, we are still standing. Pragmatists get to say, we saved the country. Both can claim victory in front of their own people, which is the only audience that matters. Russia is the clearest winner on the board. By offering to store the uranium, Putin transforms himself from a war criminal in Europe's eyes into a stabilizing power in the Middle East. He gets back into rooms he was kicked out of. He gets leverage over American policy because the moment Russia holds the uranium, American sanctions on Moscow become harder to maintain. He turns a humiliation in Ukraine into a coup in Tehran. That is the kind of long game Putin has been playing for years, and it just paid off. The United States walks a fine line. If Washington accepts the deal, it can claim a generational victory. The Iranian nuclear threat de-escalated without American boots on the ground. That is a campaign poster. That is a legacy line. But if Iran cheats, even slightly, the administration that signed it owns the consequences. Politically, morally, strategically, the upside is enormous. The downside is career-ending. Israel is the most complicated case. On one hand, the removal of Iranian uranium reduces the existential threat that has defined Israeli security thinking for a generation. On the other hand, it removes the moral and political cover for further strikes. If Iran is denuclearizing, Israel cannot keep bombing it without becoming the aggressor in global opinion. Some in the Israeli government want this deal because it weakens Iran. Others fear it because it normalizes Iran. That fight will play out inside the cabinet, on television, and in the streets of Jerusalem in the weeks ahead. The Gulf states quietly win. A less nuclear Iran is a less dangerous neighbor. Lower oil insurance premiums, reopened shipping lanes, tourism, foreign investment. The whole region's risk profile improves. Europe gains a sliver of relevance back. If European negotiators are involved in monitoring, verification, or financial guarantees, Brussels gets to matter again in a region where it has been a passenger for years. China is the wild card. Beijing wants a stable Middle East because half its oil comes through the Strait of Hormuz, but Beijing also does not want Russia to become the indispensable broker. Expect Chinese countermoves. More investment in Iran, more energy deals with the Gulf. A push to be inside the verification framework, anything that prevents Moscow from owning this story alone. And in the long term, the biggest shift is not about countries. It is about the model. If this deal works, it becomes the template. The new playbook for handling threshold nuclear states: dilute, transfer, third country custody, time-bound negotiation. That template will be applied sooner than people think to other countries. Which means tonight, in a quiet room with 2 officials and a sheet of paper, the future of nuclear non-proliferation just got rewritten. So what does this mean for America? Not the State Department America, not the Beltway America, the real one. It means the country is staring at a moment that will define how it is seen for the next 20 years, either as the power that finally pulled Iran back from the cliff, or as the power that watched Moscow take its place at the center of the Middle East. For American institutions, this is a stress test. The State Department has to negotiate a deal more complex than the JCPOA in a fraction of the time, in a more hostile Congress with a more skeptical public. The intelligence community has to verify in real time whether Iran is moving the right material out and not hiding the dangerous part. The Pentagon has to plan for both outcomes simultaneously, diplomacy succeeding, diplomacy collapsing. Each requires opposite military postures. For American democracy, this is a clarity moment. Foreign policy used to be the one area where the parties could find common ground. That is gone. A deal this consequential will be litigated in Congress, on cable news, in primary debates, and in court. Every move will be politicized. Every concession will be weaponized. The question is whether the system can still produce a coherent national position when the stakes are this high. or whether the country has lost the ability to act as one country at all. For the markets, this is a regime change. Oil traders, defense contractors, sovereign wealth funds, every one of them is rebuilding their models tonight. The end of the war means cheaper energy. Cheaper energy means lower inflation. Lower inflation changes interest rates. Interest rates change everything, from mortgages in Phoenix to bond yields in Tokyo. A peace deal in Tehran will land in your grocery bill within months, and most people will never connect the dots. For the global order, this is a fork in the road. If Russia stores the uranium, the West has implicitly admitted that there are problems it cannot solve without Moscow. That is a structural shift away from the post-Cold War unipolar world, towards something messier, something multipolar, something where Washington shares the wheel with capitals it does not trust. For non-proliferation, this is either a renaissance or a wake. If it works, it becomes a model. Other threshold states see that giving up enriched material can be rewarded, not punished. If it fails, the message is the opposite. The only way to be safe is to finish the bomb before anyone can stop you. North Korea is watching. So is every other regime weighing whether the world is worth trusting. And for the American voter, the one who has watched 4 presidents promise to handle Iran and 4 presidents fail, this is the moment to pay attention. Not because the news is loud, because the news this time is real. So, here we are. A regime that for 40 years told the world it would never bend, just bent. A war that for months looked unwinnable, just got a possible exit. A pile of uranium that has shaped Middle East policy since most of us were children, may be on a truck within weeks, headed somewhere it has never been allowed to go. And the silence around this story, the way it is sliding past the front pages tonight, is part of what should worry you. Because moments this big rarely announce themselves with sirens. They land in 2-paragraph wire stories. They live, for a few hours, in the margins of the news cycle. And then, weeks later, when the consequences start hitting, the same people who scrolled past it pretend it came out of nowhere. It did not come out of nowhere. It came tonight. From Tehran, through 2 officials, past an AP reporter, into the historical record. 30 days, that is the window. 30 days for the world's most fragile diplomatic offer to either become a treaty or fall apart in flames. 30 days during which any single incident, a stray missile, a hardliner speech, an Israeli airstrike, a Russian demand, a leaked memo could collapse the whole thing. And if it collapses, what comes after will not be a return to the status quo. It will be worse, because both sides will have shown their cards. Iran will know exactly what Washington will accept. Washington will know exactly what Iran will offer. The next war, if it comes, will be fought without illusions, and that is the most dangerous kind of war there is. So pay attention, not to the noise, to the names, to the dates, to the cities where the meetings happen, to the language in the readouts, to the quiet movements of trucks and inspectors and aircraft over the next month. Because somewhere in that flow of small events, the answer to whether the Middle East goes through a real reset or another decade of fire is going to reveal itself. This story is not over. It is barely starting. And if you want to understand the world you are about to live in, the world your kids are about to inherit, this is one of the few stories worth following all the way to the end. Stay close, stay sharp, and keep watching, because the next 30 days are going to tell us who we are.